Hey guys, Ryan here from Indie Wrestling School, and today we're talking about why I think pro wrestling is an art. Coming up. Hey guys, thanks for checking out this video. If you're new here, please consider subscribing below. We put out new videos every single Thursday for 3 Minute Thursday. I've been writing shows and wrestling shows for as long as I can remember. I mean, if you consider, writing wrestling shows with your action figures as a kid, I mean, I've been writing them my whole life. I mean, I would have notebooks and notebooks filled with things and ideas and thoughts and title histories and matches and dream matches. Just my whole life has just been wrestling. I'd like to be able to say I could write a good show in my sleep, and I probably could, but it wouldn't be a great show. A great show needs to be thought about and rethought about from the time you announce it to the day of the show. And then when you're at the show, you need to be thinking about what needs to happen on that show. And then during the show, you need to be thinking about that show. And then after the show, you need to be thinking about what you could have done better. It'll never be perfect, but you can get it as close as possible. And what makes a perfect show, and I think that's what's good about pro wrestling, is it's debatable. There's people who can't stand Joey Ryan. I mean, look at Jim Cornette, just loses his mind thinking about Joey Ryan, and I see Joey Ryan and I say that it doesn't bother me, his groin flip and all that. Like, I get it. I get why that has a fan base, and then I look at Jim Cornette and I say, I get it. I get why that has a fan base. And there's plenty of things in wrestling that I don't understand and that don't relate to me and I'm not a fan of, and that's okay. You don't need to like something just because it's wrestling, just because it falls under the banner of wrestling. And then that's where the other argument is what falls under the banner of wrestling? If you're wrestling in a bar with no ring, is that considered wrestling? Well, it all goes back to if you consider wrestling art or not. And if you do, it can't just be a Memphis style brawl. It can't just be luchadors. It can't just be hardcore wrestling. Art is not just an 8x10 picture painted in acrylic paint. There's sculptures, there's buildings, there's huge murals, there's street art. There's people who draw with chalk on the ground and it gets washed away when it rains. There's all sorts of art in the art world. So why can't there be all sorts of wrestling in the wrestling world? And I think there can be. And I think there are people who get tunnel vision and only see wrestling in one way because that's how they remember it and that's how they like it. You see, I think I grew up in a special time. I grew up during the 80s where you had that rock and wrestling connection, and then it sort of morphed into the 90s with the youth movement of the new generation. Then it went into the Attitude Era, and then I became a fan of ECW. Then I got heavily into the independents. So I think as a wrestling fan, I was a little more cultured than maybe people who grew up in the 70s where you basically had one style of wrestling from the 50s to the mid 80s. So you didn't get the different styles through the decades like we were lucky enough in the late 80s, early 90s, and early 2000s, and even up to today. So is pro wrestling art? Like everything, it's subjective. I think it is, and I think it's the best form of art out there because I've done it my whole life, and it's something I enjoy, and there's really nothing else I'd rather be doing as a hobby. But what do you think? That's all for this week. I'd love to get your thoughts in the comments below. If you like this video, beat the shit out of the like button, and we'll see you next week for 3 Minute Thursday.